In the shadow of the Golan Heights, a handful of battered Israeli tanks faced an unstoppable Syrian juggernaut. 13 tanks against 1,400. It was October 1973 and the world held its breath as the Yom Kippur War erupted. This is the story of the Valley of Tears, where a tiny force of repaired tanks held the line against overwhelming odds. How did they do it? Welcome to the tale of defiance that reshaped the Middle East. The Yom Kippur War began on October 6, 1973, catching Israel off guard during its holiest day. Syria launched a massive invasion from the north, aiming to reclaim the Golan Heights lost in 1967. Their plan was simple and brutal. Over 1,400 tanks, supported by artillery and infantry, would smash through Israeli defenses in hours. The Syrian 7th Armored Brigade led the charge, with T-62s and T-55s rolling like a steel avalanche. Israel's forces on the Golan were thin, outnumbered 10-1. Many tanks were in repair shops, crews were at synagogue, and intelligence had failed. But one man stood in their way, Lieutenant Zvika Greengold. No, first the stage was set by the 7th Armored Brigade under Colonel Avigdor Ben-Gal. The Golan Heights, a volcanic plateau rising 1,000 meters above Syria, was Israel's natural fortress. Its southern flank held the key position, a narrow valley soon dubbed the Valley of Tears. Ravine-like terrain, poor visibility, and minefields favored the defenders if they could hold. Syria's attack came at 1:45 p.m., a thunderous barrage of 200 guns pounding Israeli positions. Tanks surged forward, breaching the Purple Line, the first defensive barrier in minutes. By dusk, Syrian armor had penetrated deep, threatening to overrun the entire front. Israel's response was frantic. Reserve units mobilized, but the 188th Armored Brigade, holding the Purple Line, was decimated. Only scraps remained. 11 Centurion tanks from Company C under Captain Zvika Greengold. No, wait. Greengold arrived later. Let's clarify the chaos. The initial defenders were from the 7th Brigade's Reconnaissance Company, with a few tanks cobbled together. Mechanic Yoel Idri found 3 barely functional Centurions in a maintenance depot. They weren't even combat ready. Tracks loose, engines coughing, guns uncalibrated. But Edri rallied a crew and rolled out anyway. Joined by others, they formed an ad hoc force of just 13 tanks. Outnumbered 100-1 in their sector, they positioned in the Valley of Tears. Night fell, turning the battlefield into a hellscape of tracer fire and explosions. Syrian T-62s with their advanced stabilizers for night fighting prowled the darkness. Israeli Centurions, older British designs, lacked night sights but had thicker armor and reliable 105-meter guns. The defenders used the terrain masterfully. Hiding in wadis, dry riverbeds, they ambushed advancing columns. First kill. A Syrian tank silhouetted against the horizon, brewed up by a point-blank shot. Panic spread in Syrian ranks as ghosts struck from nowhere. Zvika Greengold arrived around midnight, a 21-year-old fresh from basic training. His tank, a shot-up Centurion named Zombie, was the only one left in his platoon. Greengold took command of the remnants, radioing, "I'm Zvika, where's the fighting?" He plunged into the fray alone. In 4 hours, he claimed 5 kills, his tank hit multiple times but refusing to die. Flames licked the turret, he fought on, crew wounded but defiant. By dawn, the Valley of Tears ran red with Syrian wreckage. Over 500 enemy tanks lay burning across the Golan, many felled by those 13. But the battle intensified. Syrian reinforcements poured in. The 1st Armored Division, 300 fresh T-62s. Artillery rained down, 2,000 shells per hour. Israeli tanks brewed up one by one, down to 5, then 3. Greengold's tank exploded. He transferred to another, continuing the fight. Captain Amos Neumann, commanding the ad hoc group, directed from a half-track. They used deception, feigning retreats to lure Syrians into kill zones. One tank, low on ammo, rammed an enemy T-55, crushing it before detonating. The Valley of Tears lived up to its name, tears of blood, sweat, and unyielding will. Syrian commanders expecting a swift victory faltered. Their tankers, elite but rigid, couldn't adapt to the ambush tactics. Radio intercepts revealed confusion. Where are the Israelis? Ghosts. By October 8th, Israeli reserves arrived, the 82nd Battalion under Ehud Barak. But the delay was bought by those 13 tanks. They inflicted disproportionate losses. Syria lost 250-300 tanks in days, Israel just 50 in the sector. Greengold earned the Hero of Israel medal, the youngest ever. Edry's mechanics became legends, patching tanks under fire with duct tape and prayers. The Golan held. Syria's invasion stalled, buying Israel time to counterattack. On October 14th, Israeli armor smashed Syrian forces at the Valley of Tears climax. The war ended with Israel repelling both Egypt and Syria, crossing the Suez and encircling Damascus. The Valley of Tears became a symbol of Israeli resilience. It proved that terrain, tactics, and sheer audacity could defy numbers. Military analysts still study it, small unit initiative over centralized command. Syria's losses crippled their army for years. For Israel, it was a stark lesson in vigilance, never again caught off guard. Today, memorials dot the valley. Tank hulks frozen in time, plaques honoring the fallen. Zvika Greengold passed in 2022, but his words endure. We had no choice but to win. The 13 tanks of the Valley of Tears remind us, in war, the impossible happens when ordinary men become extraordinary. This was the battle that stopped an invasion. The Valley of Tears was not just a battlefield. It was a crucible where the fate of a nation hung by a thread. October 7, 1973, dawned with smoke choking the sky. Syrian forces pressed deeper, believing victory was hours away. Their 43rd Mechanized Brigade, fresh and fully fueled, spearheaded the renewed assault. Over 150 tanks rolled toward Nafaq, the Israeli command center on the Golan. If Nafaq fell, the road to the Jordan Valley and Israel itself lay open. Only 7 Israeli tanks remained operational in the southern sector, 7 against hundreds. Captain Mir Zamir, known as Maish, took command of the battered remnants. His own Centurion had been hit 3 times the night before. Turret jammed, hull cracked, but the engine still growled. He positioned his force along Booster Ridge, overlooking the valley. The Syrians advanced in perfect formation, confident, almost arrogant. T-62s in tight wedges, infantry riding atop, banners flying. Israeli gunners waited until the lead tanks entered the kill box, 800 meters, then hell erupted. 100mm shells tore through thin Soviet armor like paper. First wave, 12 Syrian tanks destroyed in minutes. The rest scattered, firing wildly into the dust. Zamir's voice crackled over the radio. "Hold the line. No retreat. This is it." One tank, commanded by Sergeant Shlomo Goran, took 7 direct hits. The crew bailed out, ran to a wrecked tank nearby, and kept firing. Another under Lieutenant Yossi Dror ran out of ammo. He charged head-on, ramming a T-62, disabling both tanks in a fireball. The Syrians recoiled. Their commanders, trained in Soviet doctrine, expected linear advances and quick collapses. Instead, they faced moving shadows that struck and vanished. By noon, the valley floor was a graveyard of burning steel. Over 100 Syrian tanks destroyed in 6 hours. But the cost was brutal. Only 3 Israeli tanks still moved. One was Zamir's, now nicknamed the Limping Lion. Its left track was shredded, speed down to a crawl. Yet it held the center. Then came the turning point. At 2:30 p.m., Syrian Colonel Hassan Turkmani ordered a full brigade assault. 200 tanks supported by BMP-1 infantry carriers surged forward. Dust clouds rose like a tidal wave. Israeli artillery, finally in range, opened up. The 55th Artillery Battalion fired 200 rounds in 20 minutes. The ground shook as if the earth itself was breaking. Shells walked across the Syrian columns, detonating fuel and ammo. Secondary explosions ripped through the ranks. Tanks flipped like toys. Still they came. Zamir's tank took a direct hit from a Sagar missile. The turret ring jammed. He climbed out, stood on the hull, and directed fire with hand signals. His loader, bleeding from shrapnel, kept feeding shells. One by one, the last tanks fell silent. By 4 p.m., only Zamir's tank remained, alone, surrounded. He fired his last round, then used the machine gun until it melted. Radio message to HQ. "We're done, but they won't pass." Then silence. But they didn't pass. The Syrian assault broke. Turkmani withdrew, reporting impenetrable resistance. In reality, one tank had held them for 2 crucial hours. Those hours saved Israel. By nightfall, the 679th Reserve Brigade arrived. Fresh, Centurions poured onto the Golan. The tide turned. On October 9th, Israeli forces launched Operation Valley of Tears counterattack. Led by Colonel Ron Sarig, they swept north, recapturing lost ground. Syrian units, exhausted and demoralized, crumbled. The 188th Brigade, reborn from ashes, pushed to within 20 miles of Damascus. The war's northern front ended not with Syrian victory, but Israeli guns shelling their capital. Total Syrian tank losses on the Golan, over 1,200. Israel lost 250. A ratio of nearly 5 to 1. The 13 tanks, later joined by the 7, then the 3, then the 1, had done the impossible. They delayed the invasion long enough for mobilization. They shattered Syrian momentum. They proved that courage, terrain, and initiative could defeat mass. Military academies worldwide teach the battle as asymmetric defense perfected. The IDF rewrote doctrine, never again rely on static lines. Embrace flexibility, delegation, and battlefield improvisation. For Syria, it was a humiliation that fueled decades of resentment. Hafez al-Assad never forgot. He rebuilt his army, but the scar remained. In Israel, the survivors became legends. Zvika Greengold fought for 30 hours straight, destroying 20 of 40 tanks. Exact count unknown, records burned with the tanks. He refused evacuation until he collapsed. Mir Zamir survived, his tank now a monument at Yad Syrian Museum. Yoel Idri, the mechanic who started it all, never fired a shot in anger before that day. Yet his 3 patched tanks held the line first. The Valley of Tears is quiet now. Wind whistles through rusted turrets left as memorials. Poppies grow where blood once soaked the soil. Every year veterans return, old men with young eyes. They stand where their friends died. They remember the roar of engines, the scream of shells, the smell of burning oil. They remember 13 tanks that refused to die. This was not just a battle. It was a miracle forged in fire, a story of how a few stood against many and won. The Yom Kippur War showed Israel's vulnerability, but the Valley of Tears showed its soul. In the darkest hour when all seemed lost, ordinary people became unbreakable. And because of them, Israel endured. This is their story. This is the truth of the 13 tanks.